Good afternoon.
Yo, yo. This is episode 50 of the Beef and Bitcoin podcast with your host, Brett and CH. Today's episode, we really just wanted to do kind of like not a special episode, but just do a quick Q&A of a couple of questions that I put out there to followers and, a question or two that I've received in the past just to go over a couple of those. But what do you think, man? 50 episodes. How do you feel?
Yeah, I was going to say this is pretty monumental. I know it might not seem to a lot of people, but 50 episodes done in about 11 months roughly. It's a pretty good pace, I would say. So it's halfway to the 100 mark. Now, soon to be triple digits. I'm sure we'll get there probably. Depending on how, to be honest, depending on how everything macro-wise between Bitcoin and markets play out, we can get there probably faster because the more shit that's going on, I feel like the more we'll probably be recording and talking about it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm pumped for the next 50. It
Yeah,
was funny. I
no,
think we set a goal to try to get to. We had a goal to get to 50 by the end of this year.
yeah, I think
So
it's,
I mean, we hit that already. So that's good. And
yeah,
I mean, if the next 2 months are as wild as I think they might be, just with kind of global issues, Bitcoin issues, equity market issues, there's going to be a lot to talk about either way. So we might pump out another another 10 to 25 this year even, which would be sick.
yeah. I mean, we could eat, yeah, I would 10 easily.
Yeah.
It's only late October. Yeah, no, this is it's been quite the interesting. I feel like things are picking up again. Bitcoin pumping Friday morning into Friday night, pretty insane. I think that's definitely a sign of something. It has to. It has to. I think in the macro, whether people are joking about thank you China because China yesterday, Xi Jinping talking about crypto and like blockchain technology basically for their
Right.
basically making their own crypto, but it's not really a crypto. It's just a stable shitcoin. But anyways, kind of a big deal. I think we mentioned it last night. There's
Yeah.
definitely a different change. The past few years, even since 2017, as we talk about, everyone was really skeptical of crypto, and now it's just accepted. You hear the IMF mention it. You hear people like Brad Sherman openly saying, who's a Democratic representative in the 30th District of California, now that I remember it from last night.
Yeah.
He is, openly says what Bitcoin is and the rest of crypto. It's a completely new thing, and obviously Bitcoin's the one leading the way here right now. That basically, it's like what gold used to be and silver. It's not it's a money not controlled by anyone, and the dollar is an economic weapon just as much as the British pound was an economic weapon in the past. And then you can go even later back. When the country has the fiat currency. Well, I guess pound was based on gold because it was good as gold theoretically because it was backed by gold, which wasn't the case after the 1920s and World War One. But point being, since this whole fiat system, the dollar has become the reserve currency, even though it's backed by nothing. And well, what was it? Full faith and credit of the United States government or something like that.
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah. So I mean, that's something happens soon here, and I think we're seeing it. We're seeing it with central banks stacking gold. We are seeing it in the sense of crypto, this whole new thing that was Bitcoin being born out of the ashes of the global financial crisis. I think people realized, and there was this one guy. I don't know if he was a trader or just investor, and he was talking about he had a another trader friend who thought the whole system was going to collapse in 2000 with the dot-com bubble, which obviously most tech stocks, the dot-com stocks, completely collapsed. Companies folded up, etc. Fortunes lost, fortunes made, but everything kind of kept going on, and housing took over the role there. Housing prices went crazy in 2003, 2004, 2005, 2006, and 2006, 2007 started to peak. And if you've seen the movie Big Short, you know what happens, or if you lived through it. And the system failed completely, and the only way it was kept going was central banks pumping liquidity in the market. And that's exactly what's going on right now with this whole repo thing. Is they're preemptively acting. Something's going on. We don't know what. They won't tell us, but something is going on. Whether it's a bank that has issues or multiple banks, but something is going on.
No, yeah, I think that was actually a really good lead into one of the first Q&A topics, which was when will the skeptics start to either have a change of heart about Bitcoin or when will they start to embrace it? Because when you think about hearing stories of people in 2000 and 2001 thinking the financial system was ending, and then that didn't end up happening,
No.
and as you
And
said,
it took
that
7 years. And
right,
then
that got pushed into the real estate market, right? People fleed to their next best store of value, I guess you could say, right? And then as you ease and make loans um, easier to get, that artificially inflates the price of real estate. And then you had the real estate bubble, and now that's shifted, right? That's been morphed into a student debt bubble, an auto loan bubble. Now you have like it's very easy to get loans for to go to school, to go to college, and the price of college has just increased exponentially. It's unaffordable to go now because you will not be able to pay back the loan, assuming you take out or get no financial aid or have a scholarship or whatever. All the that risk gets bundled up and pushed into other things, and it's I'd hate to have been the guy who was like thinking the financial system was collapsing in 2001, and then the can got kicked down the road for arguably now it's like 20 more years.
yeah, now it's
And
arguably 20 more years versus, I mean,
right,
but it
and
was still
it
7 at the time, which is
it's been a right. It's been a long time, and the can get kicked down the road longer than you think, and you know, I bring this back to the
you know, people real don't, it was we talked about like at the start of the episode, well, before the episode actually, I was talking with Crypto Human here about this. It took the S&P Dow Jones. It took it from the peak in 1929 until 1929 to 1954. So basically 25 years to recapture that high. And we were talking about it. I'm like, could you imagine just waiting till 2045 to hit? Let's say the peak was now around 3,000. 25 years. So you have to wait till 2045 to even recapture that high. People are holding, QQQ or SPY or whatever, stuff like that. All those passive, it's the whole passive investing myth here is about to collapse on its face, and it's about to be really depressing. And I hate to say it, but that's what's going to happen here because it needs to happen. There's a myth that you can passively invest and nothing will happen. Your money will keep going up. The market will keep going up, and that's been a myth because majority of people that are investing now, whether they're the reality is like, okay, older generations have died off. The majority of people have been investing most of their lives. If they're 80 years old, they were born in 1940, so they didn't, by the time they started investing, the market had climbed and surpassed to a new high, and especially since the millennial boom or excuse me, not the millennial, it is the millennial boom, excuse me, yeah, in the early 80s, you've basically had, if you held any stock, for the most part, you did really well. Like as Raoul Pal mentioned it, the baby boomers were handed a gift. Bonds interest rates were all-time highs, like 15%, and stocks were, PE ratios were at all-time lows, and it was like the perfect. As he said it perfectly, they literally all they had to do was buy stocks and bonds and go to the beach. That's it. Yeah.
right. It was an easy, yeah. It was simple, and I think about this kind of in two different ways. One of which is if you have an assumption that there is a global recession in the next 12 to 24 months. From a skeptic standpoint, Bitcoin does one of two things. It either goes down and crashes along with the global recession, or it goes up and it becomes more valuable. And if it becomes more valuable, that's not to say that I kind of think if there is a global recession, Bitcoin will take a dive in the short term just because of like a risk off sell off. At this point, Bitcoin still seems like a risk on kind of investment. If you're fleeing to something, the average person isn't going to flee to Bitcoin, and even there's a lot of Bitcoin holders who just have really weak hands, right? And they're gonna fold and be like, there's no way I can stay in Bitcoin, right? Things are going to shit. And if you think about the skeptics' point of view, assume there is a global recession and Bitcoin moons, and let's say it goes to 100,000, because that was actually the most common answer that I got when I put this question out there. At what time or price does the average skeptic, like a Peter Schiff or maybe like a George Selgin, although he understands Bitcoin, he's not against it. He just doesn't think it's a workable solution. Um, you know, if you think about upgrading the financial system into the next like a smooth upgrade path, and Bitcoin plays a part of that, the skeptics will eventually have to start to embrace Bitcoin, um, on the assumption that it does increase in purchasing power in the event of more of a recessionary feel. So I'm kind of interested to hear what you think about that. Like, what's needed for Bitcoin for the average person who would just dismiss it to either take a closer look or think it has a role to play in that next evolution that we see of the financial infrastructure of the globe.
As I said earlier in the episode, more obviously more people have come around, and even in the last 2 years. But you think about 5 years ago, Bitcoin and crypto was nothing, and there's very few people in it, and there were some obviously very smart people in then early who realized how big a deal it was. But even fully accepted, and as I think I don't know who it might have been the IMF who had that report, but I remember reading a while ago. Basically, the cat's out of the bag now. These things aren't going away. They aren't. That's just the reality. They aren't going away. So, as you mentioned, how are they going to integrate into the financial system? How is that going to work? Raoul Pal mentioned you don't want, the fiat system disappear and there be nothing to replace it. Whether that be a gold standard, whether that be a Bitcoin standard, I don't know. Will that be a silver standard,
Right.
Or oil standard? I don't know. My point is you don't want the fiat system to disappear and there be nothing else to replace it, because then that's chaos. That is everything, as you know, as we were talking about, like shipping, like basic things people really don't think about, just grinds to a
They
halt,
stop working.
and your everyday life, your job, everything stops. Like if
Yeah, and I think, yeah. No, it's a good point, and I've heard an interesting theory or projection of what something might look like, and I like the concept of an upgrade path, right? If we're seeing, I mean, you and I have been talking about this for like over a year now, just the various bubbles that have bubbled up across different asset classes and globally. Um, I don't wonder if you make this assumption of a parallel financial system that's in the beginning stages of being built out to have this infrastructure, if the upgrade isn't smoother than people assume. And I know it's kind of fun to speculate on the doom and gloom of financial collapse and getting rich and Big Short kind of stuff, but like that won't be good for the majority of people.
yeah,
And I don't wonder if we won't see a smoother upgrade. So as one bubble pops, that value is it's not destroyed, right? It's just transferred. And I don't wonder if something like Bitcoin can't start to absorb these bubbles, kind of one bubble at a time, and just built like Dan Tapiero, big global macro guy. He sees that parallel system being built, and it's like, why can't the upgrade be smoother as one bubble bursts because it's been inflated through credit expansion and cheap money and all this stuff, and you see these things start to flow as Bitcoin gets stronger and that financial infrastructure starts to build. Like, we finally just got backed, right? And backed had the biggest volume that they've ever had during yesterday's insane kind of volatility. And it wasn't that much. It was like 1,100 BTC that was traded. It's nothing in the grand scheme of things, but you can't upgrade to a new, I'm going to say, database in this instance. You can't upgrade to a new system if the plumbing is not in place. It's just not going to happen. So you almost need to see infrastructure be set up so that things can start moving onto a new system as we upgrade. And I think China's talk about blockchain is just like an early indicator of, we know the wand's not gonna last because they've been printing it, just uh, printing so much money to, they have the ghost cities and all of the infrastructure they've put into place. They'll need to move to something as the currency continues to be devalued. What's that? What do you default to? What's that next system upgrade? And if the system's not ready to go, that's not good for anybody. So I think you almost, for the skeptic, they need to really see Bitcoin being used both as a medium of exchange and a store of value. And I think you and I might use Bitcoin as a store of value. We live in the US. The dollar is relatively strong compared to other fiat currencies. I don't need to use Bitcoin as a medium of exchange, really. I can use it to speculate on storing my wealth further into the future, right? My bet is Bitcoin's going to be worth more 5 or 10 years from now than it is today. So I'm gonna speculate and put my fiat into BTC and leave it there. I don't need it as a medium of exchange. But if you're in Iran or Venezuela, maybe you need Bitcoin just to survive, to pay for your food or medicine or whatever. So I think some of these skeptics both need to see A, the price increase, and then B, the various use cases of money start to be used globally. So if you're in Iran, hey, you might not be storing your wealth in Bitcoin. You're just using it because you need to pay for shit. I don't know. What do you think?
I was going to say, speaking of speculation, I think I figured it out while you were talking. So all the fiat money is going to pour into crypto, and XRP or Ripple is finally going to go to $589. There you go. I figured it out.
Yes.
It's the store of value part. That's a good point. For people who live in countries where the financial system works, Bitcoin's more of a speculative, store of value, whatever you want to call it. As in versus Venezuela, for instance, or somewhere where they have a broken financial system. Our current system still works. Be thankful. Be very thankful.
Right.
Because as I mentioned, without it, everything you do for normal life changes completely.
Right.
Just without money, me and the random person that meet, he has a cheeseburger and I want a cheeseburger. Well, I gotta have barter with him if I don't have money. If money doesn't work, so. Where we've came as a society, people take for granted, don't ruin it. Is what I'm trying to say.
Right. Money money might be the most useful technology man has ever invented.
Yeah.
Because if it just facilitates the growth and expansion of society and allows for the division of labor, right? So you can specialize. You don't need to learn all of the things. Imagine if money didn't exist and you were like, all right, I'm going to get myself a house. Well, there's nothing for you to trade it for. You might have to just build it yourself, right? All these things, you don't get that specialization where you have the carpenter, you have the fisherman, you have the doctor, the lawyer, whatever. Everybody kind of needs to do all of those tasks, which it's just not efficient or scalable for society to kind of move forward. You need money to facilitate those voluntary interactions. I just think a lot of people kind of overlook that and they think money's not important. It's arguably the most important thing that humans have kind of invented and come together on, because it makes things so much easier. All right, I think that's probably enough about when skeptics will embrace Bitcoin. I think we should go into heavy bag syndrome.
Yeah.
Because I think that's an important topic, because there are probably the majority of the listeners, or some of the listeners of the show, probably still have a bag or two that they haven't really capitulated on, or they're gonna hold it and cross their fingers, hope to catch one more pump, maybe convert it into Tether or Bitcoin, and then ride off into the sunset. And I posed this question on why people still think their favorite altcoin isn't scammy. And this is you and I kind of talked about this before, but this is something I kind of had to come to terms with for for various coins, you go ahead and you start debunking why you would even hold some of them. So if you think about something like Litecoin, you might say, oh, it's the pitches, it's silver to Bitcoin's gold. Okay, I can see how you would think that's a viable investment thesis, but the reality is when you think about divisibility, and that's why silver was necessary for gold, right? Gold was just too expensive to use in day-to-day trade. You couldn't buy a stick of gum or whatever with like a shaving of gold. It's not workable. It doesn't make sense. So you needed a bimetallism system in order to transact for cheaper goods. But that's a divisibility problem, and you don't really have that with a digital currency because it's almost infinitely divisible. So you can get to a Satoshi level, right? So there's 100 million Satoshis in one Bitcoin, and you can even get into sub Satoshi levels if you're using a layer 2 kind of network like the Lightning Network or a different layering system that doesn't even exist yet. So it kind of debunks that myth of why you'd need something like a Litecoin or any medium of exchange coin. But I wanted to kind of get a sense of what people were thinking about their bags that they're still holding. And a couple people who have dumped their bags said things like, my use case, thinking that every blockchain it's going to be used for its own use case.
I can settle this in like 10 seconds here. It's really easy.
Yeah.
And people, the people who have been in crypto for a while, it's really simple. If you do buy alts or use alts, you use them to get more Bitcoin. It's the saying that's been around for a while, and until that's wrong, it's right, and that's all that matters. And that's what a lot of people, if you see them on crypto Twitter who've been around for a while, that's why they use alts, to get more Bitcoin. That's the only reason. They don't hold bags hoping they come back one day, because a lot of those guys know, because they've been around for years, there's a shitload of altcoins that never fucking went anywhere near their highs again from the 2014, 2015, whenever there were pumps then. So just a friendly reminder, hope kills.
No. You brought up a really good point. I definitely want to touch on that now. Is you have the people, and I'm gonna preface it. Okay, so another person responded. He's a big XRP guy, and he responded and said, "This is the reason for him defending his bags."
They're a cult. They are a cult. I'm just gonna sell that straight.
Yeah.
Because that was something I looked into when I first got into crypto, and the more I got into crypto, and even before I became more of a Bitcoin person, I was like, whoa, this whole community is fucking cultish, and they are. It's the worst.
Oh yeah.
Go ahead.
Listen to what he said. He goes, this is the reason to defend his bags. And he said, because the first version of everything sucks and slowly phases out over time. So he's talking about Bitcoin there, making the MySpace argument, saying, Bitcoin's more like the MySpace of social media, and it will just be dismissed, and the Facebook version will come out. And I don't know if his assumption that XRP is the Facebook in this example, but that's an error in my opinion, because when you talk about communications protocols, there's a reason that we're still using the internet protocol today, because it was adopted widely early on first. It was open source. It allowed people to build things on it, and it wasn't shut down and locked down. It was the openness of it allowed it to flourish. And when you hear things like the MySpace argument for Bitcoin, I just don't know that it makes sense, because we're getting close to year 11 now, right? And if it were the MySpace of the cryptocurrency space, you'd see people flocking to other coins, and that's just not happening. If anything, you see transaction volume and growth in the network, making it seem that it's actually gaining more traction. And when you think about, just to your point of the 2013, 2014 alt season, the people who still have heavy bags today don't realize that the last time there was a bull run and there was a subsequent bear market, the majority of those coins never saw new highs ever again.
Ever again.
They were done.
They exist.
Right.
It's
They
not like a
exist. There's
stock.
like
A stock will
$20,000
stock
of
will
like,
stop. Will get
yeah.
removed from the exchange when it goes to zero or just bankrupt or whatever. They'll continue to exist, but it doesn't mean shit. The chain can be compromised. There's no one really mining anymore. There's a bunch of other bullshit going on too with it. That's also to keep in mind. So
No, and I no. People don't realize that if they got in 2017, 2018, and we're trying to catch a few pumps, there's a really good chance that those same coins won't pump the next time around. Like it'll be a new group of scams basically, and people didn't do their homework to look back at 2013 and 2014 and see all of those coins that were the next Bitcoin, the Bitcoin 2.0, the next big thing that everyone was excited about. And people have literally never heard of them before. And the newer group of people that came in didn't know that even took place. So they're assuming, oh, alt season's right around the corner. The bags that I bought, like, are going to pump again. And a lot of these coins have just completely disappeared. So I think that heavy bag syndrome has a lot to do with if you still have heavy bag syndrome, chances are you haven't done enough due diligence to look back historically of what's happened in like the cryptocurrency space, or did any homework just about, reading up on this in general. You haven't listened to any podcasts on the space. You haven't listened to the people who've been here since the beginning. You haven't read or listened to the Bitcoin Standard. You haven't watched a million fucking YouTube videos on the subject. Like, you just didn't do your homework and your fingers are crossed hoping that you can catch one more pump and just get out of it. It's a shame, but I think the heavy bag syndrome is not good. And all those people who would have been a great fit for Bitcoin, who would, be evangelical about it, will just completely walk away because they ended up getting wrecked and lost a ton of money. And it really sucks.
yeah, no, I agree with there. Yeah, was obviously some people made a lot of money, but there's also people forget the flip side of that coin. There's a lot of money lost in that bubble. Whether people just bought the top or just held on the whole time, and that's just another good point. Don't get too emotionally attached to what you have. But if you do end up buying shit, which is not a recommendation at all, I wouldn't recommend it. I'm probably gonna get gray
Yeah.
hair very shortly here. I'm gonna look old soon. Like,
Right.
the great example is someone was talking about it. I was reading that Trader's Confession things, and one dude was talking like, he's like, yeah, I've made it, but he's like, I'm like 37. I have gray hair. I, like, things in life. His personality is just, you're very there's no emotion. Like nothing. You're dead inside. And I feel like that's the perfect like example of when we saw Peter LeBrant the other day on Twitter make that comment on what's his name's post. Sven, two boomers
Yeah.
going at it. Two boomers on
Yeah.
Twitter.
Yeah.
What a time to be alive. And like when you read Peter's comment, Peter's just like very he's been trading for fucking 40 years, dude. The dude's dead inside. There's no
Yeah.
emotion.
Oh yeah. 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 Yeah.
Zero.
Totally. No, it's interesting to kind of watch how that goes. You can have your own opinions and thoughts about the fundamentals, right? And you and I can
Yeah.
talk about this till we're blue in the face. Like, there's just no reason why this market, equity specifically, like why that would continue going up, or even real estate. It's like it just doesn't make any sense. But of course it can. Like,
Yeah.
the can's
Exactly.
been kicked down the road so many times. And I think Peter's point was he probably doesn't disagree with what Northman Trader's
Yes,
saying.
Sven.
Like, yeah,
Yes.
yeah, obviously, the Fed's pumping $100 billion consistently into the repo markets. Like, you're already way past all of the easing that was necessary in 2008 to kind of try to get us out of the financial crisis, and it doesn't look like it's working yet. So it's kind of like, his point is, you can't not look at these facts and think things are okay. And Peter's point is, okay, then short it, right? Because you had 2001, you had 2008, and he's tried to just throw his emotion and thought process out of it and just focus solely on price and what's happening. And I'm sure both of them have done very well for themselves over the
Yeah,
past, decade
decades.
or two trading. And, and that's okay. And I can say to myself, okay, well, I'm not going to touch alts anymore because I know the fundamentals are not there, right? It's just no shot at becoming money. It's not resistant to the state. Like that's the whole point of having a cryptocurrency. It is to resist the state, to separate money and state. That is the use case, right? That is the magical part about this. And the fundamentals just aren't there for other coins. It won't happen. But that doesn't mean that they won't pump to the moon and make people millionaires. And that's something you need to be okay with. That price does not always follow fundamentals. Eventually, it does, but in the interim, you can be wrong for a really long time with a lot of this stuff.
Yeah, I'm trying to find the tweet now. I really want to find it because it's just funny. But yeah, no, exactly. Like whether we call altcoins shitcoins, it doesn't mean they won't go up in price. Like remember when Ripple, like it was about a year ago, just over a year ago in September 2018, when it pumped from like 20 cents to 75 in like one day. 3x in
Oh
one
yeah,
day
I
for no
remember.
effing reason. And like I knew it was bullshit. Like I was like, this isn't gonna last, and it didn't. I know people holding bags, and I said like, you probably want to sell now, and hey, and what it do went back down to 25 cents, and lower in Bitcoin
Right,
value
right,
too.
right.
Oh, I'm gonna find it now. Peter doesn't tweet as I was trying to look through Sven's post, and Sven posts way too much, but Peter doesn't tweet as much. Which
Yeah, yeah. Peter was pretty much saying, like,
here,
there's so
here,
many people who are bearish.
here you
Yeah,
go. Here's a perfect example of Peter, because he posts things about different. He posts about like XRP, Ethereum, Litecoin, like the major
right.
cryptos in terms of market cap. And then some dude says, "I'm curious. In the past, you talked down XRP. Do you like charting it because you simply love charts, or do you see XRP as a worthwhile investment to track? I am XRP agnostic. I am everything agnostic. Price is always king." And that's what we were trying to get to, like earlier. Peter doesn't care. He cares about price.
Yeah, and that's that's perfectly reasonable. Like that's what Peter does as a profession. He trades, he sells his trading courses and all that stuff. Like that's how the dude makes a living. Totally fine with that. Um, but it is interesting. It is interesting to hear that. You think we should talk about the quantum computing FUD?
Oh no, Peter deleted his tweet.
Ooh.
Oh no, I should have
It
screen.
was
I should have screen
it was
capped it.
something like he was
Macro
pretty much talking
bears.
about like perma bears, like
Yeah.
a lot of people have been bearish for so long and have been wrong, which that's me, right? I was bearish in December of 2018
Fuck.
and I was right for like 2 weeks and then I've been wrong for another year afterwards. So like you got to give Peter a little bit of credit because being early is the same as being wrong. If you're
Oh,
either
wait.
long or
But
short,
Sven's tweet's still there. Let me guess. You're a giant pompous ass and have been for several years.
yeah, yeah. Sven
uh,
like gave it right back to him.
yeah, and I think he got ratioed. Fuck. I
Yeah,
can't.
it is
I
so
wish I
funny.
screen capped it. It was basically it was a pretty like it was like kind of like throwing a jab. It was not a
Oh
like
yeah, yeah, it was.
Peter threw a jab. Oh God.
Yeah, I mean that's what I don't know. One of yeah, like the last topic I guess I wanted to get into. Somebody had DM me and you know talked about the quantum computing. Like, what's the deal here? What's going on with that? And while I am certainly not an expert on
No sir.
computing, there are a couple a couple things I wanted to mention. So the Q&A was pretty much, hey, quantum computing, good for Bitcoin, bad for Bitcoin. What's the deal? And I think you have to break it down into a couple different sections. So one would be, is will quantum computing get powerful enough to create new ASIC miners, like more ASIC chips, where the hash rate just goes exponential, right? So there's that risk. There's a risk of like quantum computing being able to reverse engineer or obtain the private key from a public key, and Satoshi's coins are kind of the early warning system for a quantum computer. I've heard that said before, and I think it's a good take. So if you say, okay, Satoshi's coins, there's call it 1 million coins sitting out there that have never moved, they will most likely never move. If a quantum computer with sufficient computing power can derive the private key from the public key, from those public keys, is that an issue? And this is kind of stemmed from the Google announcement of what their quantum supremacy, the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Basically, from where they're at right now, they are still orders and orders and orders of magnitude away from being able to, possess that kind of computing power. And from what I've read and looked at from, I'd say, more of the experts in the spaces, there's still a ton of different ways that you can start to change the signature schemes to make them more quantum resistant, where it would take a lot more computing power to kind of derive the private key from the public key. And then when you think about from a mining standpoint, well, if you have quantum chips that are increasing the hash rate exponentially and giving you all this additional power, the difficulty adjustment will just take care of that in itself. So quantum miners come online, the hash rate explodes, they start mining BTC faster than like 10-minute blocks, and then the difficulty adjustment fixes that, and then it goes back to taking 10 minutes every block, and then other people get their quantum miners, and it's all the same. So I don't really think from a quantum standpoint, a mining will be that big of a deal. You won't be able to just control it right away. The difficulty adjustment will kind of bring everything back into order. It'll be commoditized, and everybody will then end up using, quantum mining, and that wouldn't be a big deal. But I know you have that article up there from what our good friend Vitalik said about quantum computing.
I have here's Vitalik's analogy. It's pretty good. I'll just read it. It's like a 2-sentence thing. My 1-sentence impression of recent quantum supremacy stuff so far is that it is too real quantum computing, or so far as that I'm completely botched. I'm going to restart from the start. My 1-sentence impression of recent quantum supremacy stuff so far is that it is too real quantum computing what hydrogen bombs are to nuclear fusion, proof that a phenomenon and capability to extract power from it exist, but still far from directed use towards useful things. So basically seeing like what originally nuclear fusion was just, this wasn't the actual bomb, but the ability to do the nuclear fusion part. And I'm no expert in that, but I do understand that's before you actually have the hydrogen bomb or atomic bomb. And so what he's basically saying is it's got a ways to go.
Right, and from what I've heard on that, the Google quantum computer specifically, it can only do one task, and unless that task is, say, mining Bitcoin or trying to derive private keys from public keys, then it becomes an issue. But it's like a single purpose quantum computer. It just does one function, and that's it. So you can't necessarily deploy that to do other things that you want it to do. And then in terms of like the number of qubits necessary to start like breaking like severe or like high levels of encryption, they're orders and orders of magnitude away from being able to do that. And somebody had DM'd me and asked me like what I thought about it, and I was like, if let's assume that there's a quantum computer that can kind of break ECDSA and let's just say end Bitcoin as an example, we've got way bigger problems, because all of the encryption that's used for the banking system or nuclear launch codes or anything like that is also broken simultaneously. Yeah. It doesn't just break Bitcoin, like everything breaks. So you'd have bigger problems on your hand if all of the encryption that is used globally for various different purposes gets broken. It'll get really bad. Bitcoin won't even matter. It won't.
Yeah, Bitcoin wouldn't matter at that point, because it's
So it's not really, it's it's out of our control, but it's also something I'm just not worried about, because if Google wrote an article about that, and they could break like nuclear launch code encryption, banking encryption, it would be shut down instantly. It would just be, you'd go and you'd gobble up all that IP and you'd bury it. You wouldn't be able to use it, because there'd be fucking nukes being launched all over the place. So I don't see it as a serious threat. Like, you'd
it's like
fucking
the end
know
of
if it was
Terminator
a big
3,
deal.
dude.
Yeah, exactly. Like, it's just it's not realistic that it's that far ahead, because if they could break Bitcoin, I guess, for lack of a better term, they would do it already. It would be very profitable to break Bitcoin. You'd grab all the coins that you could, you'd dump them on the market. Yeah, like that's the
exit. The exit. Maybe that was the exit pump.
Yeah, maybe that was it. Yeah. So I don't know. I'll put some links when we get this up on other podcast episodes you can listen to, and articles on the quantum computing FUD in particular, because I think some people are more concerned about it than they should be. I think it's a great piece of FUD, because you can use the appeal to authority fallacy and just say, oh, this person said this about quantum computing, so it must be true. And, nobody really knows dick about quantum computing, or whether or not a lot of it's even theoretically possible for a lot of these quantum use cases that people are trying to talk about. So I think it's really overblown.
Yeah,
and,
it's
people
speculating on things they have zero clue they're talking
bad.
about, because I don't have any clue what I'm talking about, and there's probably a very, 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 very tiny fraction of the human population who even understands it. And that's
bingo. Exactly.
It's just people speculating. So we'll find out soon. Is this a good way to wrap it up here?
No, this is a great way to wrap it up. I think this was a good episode for episode 50. Touch on a couple Q&A topics that I think are still top of mind, especially as we're kind of in the middle and coming out into that like phase one of getting out of the bull market and seeing more volatility come in. I just want people to be comfortable with just kind of the space in general, and wrapping their heads around stuff, and always encouraging, you and I both do that, and encourage people to, take a deep dive, learn this stuff, read some books, play around with Bitcoin, use hardware wallets, just get comfortable with it. So it strengthens your thought process around what is and what is not possible.
Reading books. Come to understand any of this, because otherwise I would know nothing. It's that simple.
Right. Yep.
Like, whenever people ask me, how do you know about this stuff? It's like, there's this thing called Google or the internet, and you kind of go type things, and maybe you find a book you like and you read that book, and it leads you to another book, or it takes you down another rabbit hole, and you're curious on this topic, and then that's how it goes. So.
Right. You have to put in the work, but
Yep. That's
definitely a good way to wrap it up. This was episode 50 of the Beef and Bitcoin podcast. Make sure to follow us on Spotify, leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, like and subscribe on YouTube, and as always, send us a DM. Let us know what you want us to talk about. All right, thanks for listening.
Peace.